advisors, and all friends to the sector. Our mission is to build a vibrant social impact sector for all the people of Illinois. We provide education, advocacy, thought leadership, and facilitate collective action around issues that are important to our members and to the sector overall. We are really excited to have you with us today. This is the first of a three-part series. It's a capacity building series for nonprofits that we're offering with support from the Chicago Community Trust. Today, we'll be focusing on adapting your communication strategy and storytelling in this moment, and also preparing a communications plan in case you need a crisis communications plan. Now, given how quickly this session reached maximum capacity for our Zoom, it's really clear that nonprofit leaders are spending a lot of time thinking about this topic and eager to learn more. We want you to know that Forefront and our partners, both nationally and here in Illinois, are working to gather resources and support. So please keep an eye on our website for more information, and we'll continue to be a resource for you. I have a couple of housekeeping matters before we dig in. We wanted to let folks know we are not allowing AI recorders in this session so that folks can feel free to be candid in our conversation. However, there is a transcription available for accessibility reasons. The transcript will not be saved. We will be recording the presentations for folks who aren't able to join us today, but we will not record the Q&A. So if you have questions during the presentations, please jot down a note to yourself. Feel free to throw that in the chat. We do have a lot of folks with us today, so we may not be able to get to every single question, but we will do our best. But please do put your questions in the chat, because not only will we be using for the conversation today, but also to inform speakers and programs that we'll have in the coming months. So, to today's program, we are very pleased to have three Chicago communications professionals sharing their expertise. We have Rebecca Evans starting us off with strategic communications in this moment, and I will turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Susie. Nice to be with everyone today. I will share my screen and get started. I think you'll find that my portion of the presentation sort of sets the stage, and then it'll progress nicely as Jhmira speaks and Natalie speaks. They have some really practical tools for all of you. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Hopefully that works. Susie, can you nod if you can see my screen okay?
I see the screen, but it's not yet in presentation mode for me.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. As Susie said, I'm Rebecca Evans. I'm a partner and co-founder at Stomping Strategies. We are a media relations firm, social media, digital marketing, and we work a lot with nonprofit organizations, coalitions, political candidates, and people in the advocacy space. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about strategic communications in this moment. And when we say in this moment, I mean in 2025, under an administration that's paying very close attention to language, and in a lot of cases tying it to funding. And so I think the conversation that we're going to have today, please know that I've been having this conversation with clients throughout the year. Everyone's kind of struggling with different things. So I'm happy to be here with all of you. Thank you. But first, let's level set. I know that everyone is the organizations are facing difficult choices about how to communicate in this environment. And I've spoken with organizations that are maintaining their language, they're maintaining their messaging, regardless of what the administration says, and they're doing that for their own reasons. A lot of organizations find it integral to pursue their mission, to maintain their language. A lot of organizations do it as a form of resistance. And there's a lot of organizations that have significantly adjusted their approach. And they're doing that because they feel it's necessary to do so to preserve federal funding or even to just maintain support from corporate donors, because even corporate donors are looking for organizations that are aligned in messaging with the current administration. So I'm not here to advocate for one strategy or another, but I do want to offer some practical guidance to help put you on a path that's the right way for your organization to communicate. So let's get into tactics and messaging. I want to make clear, and I think it's really important that we all remember that how you communicate about your work, it doesn't change your work. So the way you talk about the work you do does not change the work you do in a lot of cases. So when we choose our words, it doesn't take away from your mission. Here I have reframing does not equal redesigning your mission. What we're really trying to do is make sure that we're communicating in a way that helps us accomplish our mission and meet our goals. And so we'll get into that a little bit. And on the next slide, I want to give you an example of someone who adjusted his message, his verbal and nonverbal communication in order to move closer to his goal. And I do want to offer the caveat that this is not a political message. It's just a very nice, recent visual example. Okay. So here we have Ukraine's President Zelensky in March talking to Donald Trump. Zelensky went to the White House with the same goal that he's been going to the White House with, whether it was during Joe Biden's administration or Donald Trump's. And he had a goal. However, during this meeting in March, Donald Trump and JD Vance kind of railroaded him about his message, his verbal and nonverbal communication. They wanted him to say thank you. They were upset he wasn't wearing a suit. And there was so much distraction with that they couldn't even hear the substance of what Zelensky really came to talk about. So fast forward 5 months later to August, Zelensky shows up again to the White House, same goal. This time, though, he changed his outfit and he wore a variation of a suit. And it's important that we say a variation of a suit because he didn't do the copy paste JD Vance, Donald Trump suit and tie. He was still very much on brand for himself, right? It was a suit, but it was monochromatic wartime president without a tie. And he went in with the same goal. And he was received by the president in almost a happy manner, and it made it easier for the president to hear what Zelensky was truly there to talk about, ultimately making it easier for the president of Ukraine to accomplish his goal in that conversation. So let's talk a little bit about some questions that are helpful to ask ourselves in our own organization when we decide how we want to communicate. And the first question always, what's your mission? What's your goal? Because you want to stay centered in that and you want to know what you're working toward. Another question to ask yourselves, how do we move toward our goal within the constraints of this moment being what I mentioned earlier? How do we need to communicate? Who do we need to communicate with and where to meet our goal? So thinking about your audience. And then how do we move toward our goal without retribution? So these are all just some examples of questions you could ask yourself as you think about communicating moving forward. I'll take an example through this journey of questions. Say our goal is to raise money so that we can fund our mission, right? How do we move toward our goal within the constraints of this environment? The constraints of this environment being that we are at risk of losing federal funding. Who do we need to communicate with and where? If our goal is to raise money to fund our work and federal funding is being cut off, you might want to think about different audiences to target. So maybe it's more corporate and individual donors to make up for potential lost federal funding. Where are those corporate and individual donors? What channels are they on? What are they reading? What are they watching and listening to? And then as you think about how you're going to refine your message, if you are, just make sure it's very consistent across the board. So you want to audit your website to make sure you have the language that meets the moment. You want to make sure that your spokespeople are using that language in press interviews, use that language internally and on social media. Again, going back to audiences, you want to make sure that you're talking to the right media outlets to reach your audience. And then consider visuals that help you communicate your mission, right? We're focusing so much on the words that we're speaking, but know that that imagery really complements and supports your mission and signals your values. So remember that that's an important tool too. And then so much of the work, at least a lot of my clients do, is very DEIA focused. And so some of the organizations that are doing that work they've made the decision to adjust their language. And so they've gone about making those adjustments, focusing more on the why and less on the how, focusing more on places and less on people, focusing more on inclusive and less on exclusive. As an example, one of my clients does a lot of Latino youth programming. So when they talk about it now, they say they support programs for Latino youth and all youth in Chicago. And that's their way of making their work or messaging more inclusive. And then I'll just leave you with this parting question to also kind of help frame your mind when you have conversations about this at your home organizations. Are you making progress or are you making a point? There's no right or wrong answer. This was a question that was given to me a few weeks ago, and I thought it was like a very helpful way to think about what my clients are pursuing. So are you making progress? Are you making a point? Is it one or the other? Are you doing both? But I think it's a helpful conversation for you to have with your home organizations as you go ahead and think about communication moving forward. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it over to Jhmira.
Thanks, Rebecca. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jhmira Alexander. I am the president and CEO of Public Narrative. We've been around for nearly 40 years, and I'm excited about this training and really want to commend Forefront and the Chicago Community Trust for hosting this. We hear this quite often that we are in unprecedented moments. But what I'm finding as I learn more from some of our clients is that, and even go back to recount history, is that there's not very much that's unprecedented about this moment. We are indeed the leaders that we've been looking for. And so I'm really excited about this opportunity for us to think outside of the box of how we do our work, how we approach the focus of our work, the impact that we drive, and then the power in the storytelling and narrative development within our own individual organizations. So right now we're going to talk a little bit about the types of narratives that you may apply to your storytelling. So there are 5 different types of narratives. The first being descriptive narratives, where you're able to connect imagery, ideas, and details to convey a sense of time and place. You have your viewpoint narratives that present events or scenes to your audience so that they understand and see them through the narrator's feelings, desires, beliefs, or values. Your historical narratives that have one thing in common, or one thing common to historical narratives is the different genres that are shown through the historical process. It links causation from event to event, showing the chain of reaction that leads to how things pan out. We have, of course, our linear narratives, which through linear narratives, there's a narration where you tell the events in the order that they happen or in sequence. And then, of course, there are your nonlinear narratives that, of course, tell the story in the order that they did not necessarily happen. And so when we think about the types of narratives that we might apply our messages to, you want to be mindful of the goal of your mission. You want to be mindful of what you're hoping to accomplish through your storytelling, and tap into the types of stories that you're going to tell in order to convey the very impact that you're looking to drive through the storytelling. And so, for example, you may be gearing up for a fundraiser. You may be gearing up for a membership drive. You may may be gearing up for some significant event in alignment with your organization. But in thinking about where we are presently, all of our organizations are in different stages of these significant changes. And so you want to be mindful that though things may be a bit challenging at this moment, you've overcome challenges in the past. And what has that had to look like? I'll give you a few personal examples in leadership. Some of what we're seeing now, I've experienced in my leadership at Public Narrative even before some of the changes that have come down the pipe. And so I'm able to tap into the resources that I've utilized in years past, but that hasn't come without being true to the narrative that I want to drive. What narrative do I want to drive for my team's experience? What narrative do I want to drive for my board's experience? What narrative do I want to drive for the audience that we serve externally? What narratives do I want to drive for their engagement with the organization? You want to be sure that you're anchoring yourself, of course, in a lot of this, because as the manager of those changes, you want to be sure that you're not deviating from the sticking to the script. Basically, you're not deviating from the original goals and the mission of the organization, but understanding how best to pivot, how best to shift, and how to shift in such a way that allows for the organization to be even more impactful without deviating away from or drifting away from your original mission. It is not an easy feat, and in some cases it requires identifying what your formula might be. For us as an organization, we really dive into storytelling as a part of our business model. And so when we think about storytelling and collecting stories, establishing narratives that help drive the legacy of the organization, we want to utilize stories to create bonding and community. Now is an opportune time for you to really dive into the archives of your images from past events, from past functions. Remind people of why they were first excited about your organization. Remind your funders why they were first excited. Understand from your funders what their focus and what their vision is presently and how they're helping to meet the moment, and be certain that you're in alignment with that. Now, in addition to receiving their support, also reach back to see if there's a way that you can be of support to other grantees. I know this is a time where we really want to focus on the sustainability of our work and our networks, but I think it's important that we understand how we can collaborate and how we can get creative in that collaboration. I have seen time and again where simply extending an olive branch of support to some of our fellow grantee organizations has opened up additional support from that funder, or have opened up additional opportunities from other members of another individual's network. So you want to think about how you're driving the narratives for your organization through the stories that you're telling, that you're giving believability and familiarity, that you're helping people understand what makes your organization relevant, what makes it relevant to Chicago, relevant to the state of Illinois, relevant to the community that you serve. Help people understand the relevance, and be sure to back most of that storytelling and that relevance up. And Rebecca talked about this in how you derive your messages, but also including the numbers. It helps people understand the impact that you drive, and do that through and by your storytelling. Honoring complexity within your storytelling, but also keeping it simple. Sometimes the simplicity of our approach to our work is the greatest gift that we can give our communities, because it helps them understand what we know can be much more complex, but it helps them to understand on a micro level exactly where we are and where they can check in, where they can dive in. And so you want to be sure that you're creating a bridge in your storytelling where you're influencing, persuading, and/or directing. So those calls to action are very important. I've shared this information with you. Here's what you can do with it. Make a donation, refer a family, whatever the call to action might be. You want to tie that back to a story that helps to build that bridge. Oftentimes you can tap into the emotions of an individual based on, a story that you share, how vulnerable you're willing to get. And this is not suggesting that for the folks on this call, it's not suggesting that you have to be the one to come up with all the stories. The important thing of being able to really leverage your network and leverage your team is in understanding that we all have an experience unique to how we engage with the organization. Tap into those networks within your organization and allow for your peers, your colleagues, your funders, allow for them to be your storytellers and ambassadors for your mission. We want to think about how we've created loyalty within our organization. There are folks that just as much as we want sustainability for our orgs, there are people who want sustainability for us just the same. And so we want to tap into a measure of that loyalty and understand where that allyship lies, not to be confused with simply draining folks or tapping further into a relationship that we may not have deposited much into. We want to think about the reciprocity in it. How are we coming together with our partners, leveraging our stories, leveraging our experiences, and allowing for all boats to rise? And of course, we want to think about how stories give us power over the past. Oftentimes, we're able to tap into our experiences in such a way that allows us to utilize these various types of stories. And this is not an exhaustive list, of course, but it is also very helpful to know that the types of stories that we can utilize in conveying these messages include origin stories. So maybe you have a leader, a new leader that has joined the organization, and you want to introduce your audience to why they're committed to the work. Or perhaps the leader has been there for years and you want to reintroduce a particular perspective that the leader may have. You want to think about that origin and where that started. So for example, you know, an origin story could start with when an individual, of course, started with an organization, but it can also go as far back as to when an individual committed to the work that could live far beyond the beginning of their start with the organization. You want to think about leadership, a leadership journey or a hero's journey, tapping into those types of stories. Typically, those stories similar to how we might position our victories and our successes might display challenges that we had to overcome, hurdles that we had to overcome, objectives and obstacles that we've had to face, and understand how are we going to strategize to get to the other side of this. And so this is why, having done this so often, this is why I'm confident that there is another side of this. We have to take the time as leaders to really sit with ourselves and focus and understand how are we going to get to the other side of this. And it is so easy to get caught up in, and I'm not minimizing the emotion that comes with it, because the work that we do impacts families, and it starting with the families that are impacted by our work, you know, as our teams have their own respective families. So I'm not trying to minimize the emotion that comes with that, but we have to conquer those emotions, and we have to conquer those emotions in such a way that we're able to utilize them for good. And that looks different for all of us, but we want to really think about why we invested our time in this work and tap into that as a method of storytelling. There is a measure of conviction that comes as you're delivering a story that you believe passionately in, and it moves people to change, because these are not just words you put together. So it challenges us to use that vulnerability, to use that transparency in a moment in time where the stakes are high, but understanding that we're not simply using this for the sake of a therapy session. We're using this information because we're still passionate, we're still committed, and we want our communities to reflect that commitment. So as we practice our narrative building, and we won't practice today, but you all will receive the slides, and you can walk through these exercises to craft out what your written narratives look like, and of course, craft out what your oral narratives look like. It's been a pleasure to present to you all this afternoon, and I hope that you'll join us on Wednesday, December 3rd, 2025, at the David Rubenstein Forum on the campus of the University of Chicago for our Connecting Media and Community Conference, where we're reframing purpose, possibility, and partnership. It's free to attend. Watch our website, publicnarrative.org, and join our newsletter for more information about registration. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Everybody see this? Jhmira, thank you so much. That was really powerful. And Rebecca, thank you for kicking us off. I'm here to talk about, I'm sort of the Debbie Downer of the group, whereas Rebecca and Jhmira talked about all the work that can go into, you know, inspirational storytelling and how to communicate broadly. We're here to talk about the backside of that, using those powerful stories and narratives for when the worst case scenario comes to life. So very quickly, just an introduction of myself. I'm Natalie Bauer Luce. I am president and partner of a Chicago firm, a public affairs and crisis management firm. We do corporate reputation management. We do issues advocacy and crisis management. So this is the type of work we do all day, every day. We work with corporate clients, we work with sports teams, and of course, we work with a number of nonprofits. When it comes to crisis, our role is really to be, you know, sort of part grief counselor, part strategic advocate, and really that guide, the person to take you by the hand when, again, sort of the thing that keeps you up at night has to come to fruition. And so we're here to help kind of create the game plan to get back to positive territory, to regain control of the situation, regain control of your narrative. And what that looks like in action is, you know, we consider ourselves very fierce advocates for our clients in the public arena, in the media. But we're also here to help our clients take their medicine and instill a disciplined approach to, again, getting out of trouble and getting back to positive territory. So in our case, we often have to say the quiet things out loud or say the things that folks might not want to hear. It's also important to note in times of crisis or in getting ready for a crisis and being in a state of readiness and preparedness, we regularly counsel with with a client's legal partner or advisors. It's important in that realm to balance both the legal necessities and perspectives, as well as the sort of public and public optics, to make sure that those elements are balanced. Because of course there's there's the court of law and there's the court of public opinion, and both of those have an impact on your reputation. Want to start off by talking about just exactly what is a crisis. And I talked earlier about doing issues management versus crisis management. And we do both. And on the front end, on the issue side of things, it's really where we work with clients to try to keep them out of trouble, stop the issue before it becomes a full-blown crisis. So it might be, you know, a staffing issue that you recognize might create problems down the line that then you are putting mitigating factors into place. A crisis then is, you know, that full-blown element that really runs the risk of undermining your reputation, threatening the operations of your organization, or really negatively impacting your various constituents or stakeholders. In the environment we're operating in, we've all touched on this, but you know, nonprofits are facing sort of a perfect storm, if you will, right now, of funding issues, funding threats, regulator scrutiny, and certainly that can also take the form of program impacts, as well as much dreaded staffing issues. So really, when we talk about crisis preparedness, it comes down to a shift in mentality. It's not you know, when you watch the news and you see, you know, some sort of, you know, terrible incident happening in your neighborhood, and you hear these folks who say, I never thought it could happen in a place like this. And a lot of leaders think in that way too, where you know, there's something that keeps them up at night, but they're not taking those steps. It's human nature to procrastinate, of course, but they're not shifting into that mode of thinking when. It's not an emphasis of if a crisis will happen, but when it will happen, because unfortunately, whether we like it or not, something is going to impact your organization at some point or another. And so it's better to be prepared. And as I said, for nonprofits right now, obviously, you're under incredible pressures. And so now is the time, if you haven't started to put those resources and investments in place, to really start thinking through the lens of not if, but when, and being ready for anything. And so what that looks like in action is really aggressive scenario planning, thinking through all the different ways that your organization could be negatively impacted, and developing essentially what we call crisis playbooks. And so that comes down to some practical elements of, you know, identifying the team, who's responsible for what and when, understanding how to operate with transparency, how to operate with empathy and respond to these issues so that you can start to build credibility in the earliest stages of a crisis. And then Also importantly, and we heard this from Jhmira and Rebecca as well, is consistency, speaking with one voice. You have many audiences and many stakeholder groups that you need to connect with. But you want to make sure that you're sending a consistent message so that you're not raising questions about your credibility. So once you make that shift, we put together just sort of a very practical list of steps that your organization can take to get into a state of readiness. Again, it comes back to those playbooks. Do you have one in the first place? If not, you should develop one. And if you have one, have you looked at it lately? Have you dusted it off, pulled it off the shelf, and run through sort of tabletop exercises so that, again, the team is ready and able to jump in at a moment's notice. Playbooks also contain things as simple as just holding statements so that you're not staring at a blank piece of paper when you have a reporter knocking on your door or ringing your cell phone for a comment. So it's a way to it's sort of a bit of a cheat sheet so that you're in a more capable state when the worst case scenario comes to fruition. Again, roles and responsibilities. Does everybody on the team know what their job is and at what time they need to, kind of step to the plate? And then we talk about sort of a decision tree in terms of a workflow of how you're gathering the team, how you're discussing the issues, gathering facts about what has happened, and then how are you deploying that team to aggressively address the issue. Continuing in the checklist in terms of other elements that your organization can be mindful of as you're getting into a place of more crisis preparedness is, are you doing all the things to kind of hear and see what's happening around and within your organization? Is your team doing social listening? Are you doing media monitoring? Are you looking for those cues and potential signals that can potentially help you we talk about it as in the sense of looking around corners, trying to anticipate things before they happen so that you can, snuff it out at an early stage. In addition, identifying and speaking back to roles and responsibilities, have you identified who is going to step to the microphone if and when something occurs? You always have to have a credible representative. Is it the leader of your organization? Is it your legal counsel? Is it a third party? Those are types of things that you want to make sure you're ready for. And you want to make sure that those individuals are ready with the message. They understand your mission, they understand your organization, and they're ready to, capably represent the organization at the right time. And last but not least, this is sort of a longer term, more sustained priority is building coalitions, building relationships with key partners, obviously your board members, key donors, other, leaders in the community, so that if and when something occurs, you have, a steady group of supporters who are willing to step up and speak out on your behalf and amplify what the organization is saying in its own right. Again, it's another way to build credibility. And the way we talk about it in our business is it's always better to make friends before you need them. It's much harder to do so in a crisis. So those are some of the sort of practical elements of pulling together a crisis plan. We want to talk more about this theme of storytelling that both Rebecca and Jhmira got into. In a crisis, a lot of the same themes and priorities and principles that they talked about ring true, and it particularly comes down to leaning into your mission. That will guide you and really make sure you're staying in the appropriate lane so that when you're in a difficult time, leaning back on your mission, that's sort of your home base, you're able to come to the table with credible information. And again, that concept of simplicity that we talked about earlier really is important in a crisis. You need to be able to break through the noise where you have, reporters, coming down on you with questions. You have, families and communities coming after you, have elected officials, speaking with consistency and clarity and simplicity of messages about, here's what's happened, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we're doing to address the problem, and what's coming next. And what we really want to emphasize, it's not just issuing a press release. I like to say that press releases can't paper over your problems. It's really talking about making the plans and the work that you're doing on the ground to address the issue, making the communications around that actionable. So you're talking about operational changes, policy changes that you're making, things of that nature, so that you're showing and not just telling. It's like we like to say in our business, if you're explaining, you're losing. So you want to be showing people that you're actually taking actions and taking the threat or the issue seriously. We talked a little bit earlier about different roles and responsibilities, and that spokesperson is really a critical part of the team. And so again, is it the organizational leader? Is it your general counsel? It's really important to identify the right person who can step up to the microphone in times of challenge. And one thing I want to raise is sometimes we'll often recommend to our clients that maybe it's a third party, maybe it's an outsider, it's somebody who can step in, bring their expertise in a way that can sort of alleviate some of you, kind of relieve some of the pressure in the room, create some wiggle room to operate. And I have just a quick example here of a healthcare provider that we worked with during the height of COVID, who had unfortunately had a number of fatalities at one of their facilities. We brought in an outside infectious disease expert to start talking about it this time when not a lot was known about COVID, how it spread, and how to stop it, to help infuse some credibility into the situation and to allow the organization to sort of pause, take a breath, create a game plan, and stabilize the situation. So really think through who's the face of the organization and the mission at this critical time. On the other side of this, you want to be thinking through your audiences. Who do you need to communicate with? What do they need to hear? And how are you ensuring that you're communicating information that they need to hear? So we're talking about, for example, regulators or elected officials versus the media versus, direct constituents or clients. They're all different audiences. They all have different needs and priorities. So you need to be communicating with them in an appropriate way. But again, back to that importance of consistency. If you create inconsistency, if you're giving different facts to different groups, you're going to create more questions than answers about the situation on the ground. So I've talked a lot about what to do in a crisis. It's also sometimes easier to explain what not to do. And so I wanted to just go through a couple of kind of things to avoid, pitfalls to avoid, things we've seen from our clients where, maybe something was kind of brewing early on, but as a result of hesitation or disbelief, they didn't take action quickly enough. And unfortunately, it kind of got out of control. And so that's the first one is don't wait too long. Oftentimes you're still, kind of dealing with the shock of your worst nightmare coming to life, which is completely understandable and human. But you need to be able to snap quickly out of that and move into action mode. And that's the importance of that preparedness and planning in advance, so that when you are in that sort of emotional state, you're able to then turn to those resources that you've created to help guide you through the process. Because if you do wait too long, if you sort of put your head in the sand and hope that the issue will pass you by, more likely than not, it's not going to pass you by. It's going to get worse. You're creating a vacuum that can only invite others to fill that in for you. You're essentially handing over the microphone or the pen to them to write and tell your story for you instead of the other way around. So timing is of the essence. In addition, on the flip side of that, not sharing enough, not being quick enough, providing too much information or over-explaining, again, that can oftentimes get you into tricky territory, whereas you're creating more questions that you might not be wanting to answer, or you're potentially providing inaccurate information. In a crisis, things are fluid, they're moving fast, so you really have to stick with what you know. You can also communicate what you don't know, but you never want to be in a position of saying too much. So again, back to that concept of consistency and simplicity of message. Again, I talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of the different audiences. You've, of course, got your internal staff, a very important constituency. And then, of course, you have the external actors, the media, elected officials, regulators, auditors. If you're sending different signals to different groups, you're going to find that you're going to be making things more difficult for you as the process evolves. And then last but not least, it's really important to learn from mistakes that were made. Doing a post-mortem, we see a lot of times organizations, the ones that are trying to stick their head in the sand, they just want to move on from it, forget like it never happened. But when you've gone through, your worst nightmare come to life, you really should want to learn from it so that you can prevent it from happening in the future. So we really emphasize for our clients to do a postmortem, look back at what went well, what went wrong, how did this crazy situation come to fruition in the first place, and then address those issues so that you're doing the necessary risk mitigation. I just want to wrap up and then we'll get to questions. And I'm happy to, speak through specifics for your organizations, as I'm sure Jhmira and Rebecca are as well. But just in terms of takeaways that I wanted to leave you all with, again, the importance of speed, being quick to activate the plan, being consistent in your message and transparent about, again, what you know, what you don't know. You're not going to have all the facts. And so it's better to be transparent about that because, again, that is what builds credibility in a time where people are questioning you and your organization. It's really important to look at all those audiences, understand all the different groups that need to hear from you, both internal and external to the organization. And that pairing of action with your communication. It's not just issuing a statement and assuming that that's going to take care of it. It's really pairing the action of what's happening on the ground and helping your key audiences understand that, because again, that will speak back to the credibility and show that your organization is really taking this situation seriously. In addition to that, quick early communications is important, as well as just consistent ongoing communications. Even if you don't have anything new to share during the key moments of a crisis, it's important to keep that communication, keep a good cadence going so that people are hearing from you. And again, understanding that you're taking this seriously. And then last but not least, you're in your worst case scenario, the thing that you've dreamt about overnight or has kept you up at night has come true. But taken seriously, if you invest in the resources to be prepared, to have a game plan and to effectively execute that game plan, even in the midst of a crisis, it can help to bolster your reputation. People can walk away respecting how you've responded to that worst case scenario, and it may even in the long run create new opportunities. So I just want to emphasize the importance of not letting human nature take precedence, really taking the time to plan, invest in these resources when you have the time, so that not if but when a crisis befalls your organization, you're ready to jump into action. And so with that, I will wrap it up and hand it back to Susie to facilitate our Q&A.
Thank you so much. Thank you all, Rebecca, Jhmira, Natalie. We really appreciate your time and expertise. I will ask my colleague to go ahead and turn off our recording.